Hey, welcome to tutorial number 10 in my series for complete beginners on the piano. The series is running throughout 2017. If you're new, you might find it helpful to check out the series playlist. You'll find the link right underneath this video, and you might like to subscribe to my channel using the red subscribe button you can see down here in the bottom right of the screen. That way you'll never miss an episode. Okay, in the previous tutorial, number 9, we learned about the concept of key, and I gave you a new piece to work on. In this tutorial, we're going to go through that piece and reinforce some of the concepts that we touched on briefly in the last tutorial. Then I want to introduce you to some new scales to add to your practice, and finally we have yet another new piece to work on. Okay, so that's a lot to get into one tutorial. Let's get going. So first off, let me play through last week's piece. First of all, I'll play it with the score on the screen. Okay, and now I'll do it again so that you can see my hands. Okay, there we go. I wasn't playing the repeats, by the way, for the second 8 bars. Hopefully that sounds something like what you came up with, though don't worry if you're not playing it at quite that sort of speed yet, or if your dynamics aren't perfect and stuff. My dynamics weren't perfect there when I was just kind of bashing it out. So really do think about getting a regular tempo and paying attention to the softs and louds and things like that. It's not for this kind of level. It's not an entirely straightforward piece, and you were working it out from scratch. So if you can play it pretty well, then do give yourself a big pat on the back, because you've done a great job. If you're still struggling with it, keep practicing, yeah? Maybe wheel back this video a few times and give yourself a little bit of guidance. Just a couple of things you might like to look out for as you continue to play this, just before we move on. That right hand melody starts with that octave jump, G to G, okay, and then is straight down to this F sharp. Now if you're new-ish to the piano, then that's the sort of thing that's going to test your dexterity, as your 5th and your 4th fingers tend to be, it's not quite the weakest, weak isn't quite the right word, but they're the ones where it's most difficult to develop a fine motor control. And here they're kind of, they're kind of out on their own. So practice that movement, okay? If you can, and aim for an end result that is musical and smooth. Okay, if you're still at a stage where you can, I can just make it and just hit the notes, that's not enough. You need to be kind of confident with it. One thing you will notice, by the way, is that when I had my finger on when I had my thumb, my first, my number 1 finger, as it were, on that bottom G, I was already stretching up with my 5th. Yeah, I wasn't just sort of like this and then I wasn't taken by surprise. Rather, I was lining up the next note. Okay, so that's sorted. Now, at the start of the tutorial, I said we'd be looking at some new scales. In the last tutorial, number 9, we looked at one of the reasons that scales are so important. Each key, major and minor, has its own scale, and a piece in a particular key will mostly use the notes of that key scale to build its melody and its chords. So this week, we're going to make some pretty major progress and learn 3 new scales: D major, F major, and A minor. Okay, you'll find them all, by the way, scored out with fingerings in the accompanying PDF, which, as usual, you can find linked underneath this video, yeah? I've put C major and G major in there also as a kind of reminder, and everything now I've scored out in 2 octaves, because that's the form we're going to be practicing them in from now on. Okay, so let's start with F, because like G, it contains one black note. Let me play it through. I'll do it in 2 octaves. Here it is in the right hand. Okay, and again in 2 octaves in the left. So right away you probably notice that black note there, okay, and you might be thinking, okay, that's the black note immediately to the right of A, so it's A sharp. Well, you're sort of right, because in other circumstances we might well call that note A sharp, but in the context of the key of F we call it B flat. Just as a sharp is always the note immediately to the right, immediately up from the equivalent natural note, so F, F sharp, so a flat is the note immediately down from it, B, B flat. If you have a look at the score of the scale, you'll see that it uses a flat symbol right in front of the Bs, okay? Flat symbols can appear in key signatures too, so you remember last week we saw that the key signature of G major has an F sharp in it. Well, the key signature of F major has a B flat in it, as we'll see when we look at our practice piece later. So at this point you're probably like, whoa, Bill, why on earth is it B flat rather than A sharp? Why does it matter? Why do we need flats and sharps? Why do we need both? The short answer, and this always kind of feels like a bit of a cop-out, but it's going to save us diving into a load of music theory before we need to, is don't worry about that for now, okay? For now, the reason it matters is that it matters, yeah? Terrible, embarrassing cop-out answer, but we're just going to have to leave it at that for now, because it would mean kind of disappearing down a rabbit hole of music theory to sort that one out. So, for now, there's a scale of F major, our first scale and our first key with a flat in it. Okay, it's also actually a pretty tricky scale to finger, especially in the right, because you have this 4th on the B flat and you have to go under with your thumb. And you'll also have noticed that right at the top of the scale, it finishes with a 4th finger in the right. Okay, that's not a mistake. That's how it's supposed to be. The left hand is a bit more standard, yeah, with 5th and thumb. But when you see that 4th in the right at the top on the left hand, don't worry about it. That is normal. Okay, so after all that drama with F major, we're now going to be looking at something relatively simple, which is D major. D major has 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp, and its fingering is pretty much the same as G major. Okay, so here we go, right hand. Deliberately taking this reasonably swiftly so that we're not making things too easy for you. I want you to go to the PDF and work out the notes. And here it is in the left hand. I'll start all the way down here. Okay, nothing too dramatic or new there, and as I say, if you can play G major okay, you should be okay with D major. Now, we have something kind of new and interesting in terms of the scale of A minor, which we're going to look at in 2 forms, A natural minor and A harmonic minor. Okay, which has that mysterious black note up there. Now, if you have ever had any piano lessons, maybe years ago or whatever, then in the early years at least, you'll have really hammered the harmonic minors. That's that one. And also maybe a scale called, if you got this far, a scale called the melodic minor, which is different on the way up and on the way down, and kind of complicated, at least when you practice it. But for you guys, and in terms of the kind of music I think you're going to be interested in playing, I think natural and harmonic minors are the most useful. So let's start with A natural minor. Here it is in the right hand. And in the left hand. Okay, now you might notice that it doesn't have any black notes. It's just the white notes A to A. That means it uses exactly the same notes as the scale of C major. Yeah, just starting and ending on A rather than C. And that point is important, excuse me, because A minor is what we call the relative minor key of C major. It's the minor key that shares the same sharps or flats of a particular major key. So no sharps or flats in C, and no sharps or flats in A minor. So if a piece is in the key of A minor, no sharps or flats in the key signature, just like C. Okay, so I think maybe when we were talking about key signature the other day, we said just seeing the key signature will kind of narrow down what key a piece is in. It'll tell you that it's either in a particular major key or its relative minor. Yeah, so that's kind of useful, but a little bit academic for now. But as I say, a useful bit of music theory just to tuck away. A harmonic minor is just a little bit different. Harmonic minor scales always have a sharpened seventh note. So here's the regular A natural minor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, but in the harmonic minor we sharpen that seventh note, G sharp, and go to A. So here it is in the right hand. And here it is in the left hand. Whoops, a bit of a glitch there, but fell off that G sharp. And that's worth mentioning actually. In both hands, that's a little bit of a... I've got no excuse because I've been doing it for 30 years, you know, but that is a little bit of a stretch, yeah, so you might find that one a bit challenging. You might want to take it, maybe just practice an octave at a time first and take it fairly steadily. Now, there's no key of A harmonic minor, and if a G sharp note ever crops up in a song or a piece of music in A minor, it'll always be marked with an accidental and not in the key signature. So, why do we use and practice the harmonic minor scale? Why is it useful? Basically because composers very often find it's handy to use a sharpened seventh rather than the natural seventh degree of the scale when they're writing minor key music. That's because the G sharp sometimes gives them a more natural route to the A, the tonic note of the key, than the G natural does. It's a closer note. It's what we call a leading tone to the A. And that can also actually be useful in harmony, but we won't dig into that for now. You know, that G sharp is kind of handy in A minor for all sorts of ways, but that is the basic underlying reason why we practice the harmonic minor. Suffice to say that it's useful to practice both the natural and the harmonic versions of your minor scales because minor key songs kind of use both, and it's good to have both fall instinctively under your fingers. Got all that? If you have, great. If you haven't, don't worry about it too much. You'll find that your understanding of music theory grows as you play more and more. And the most important thing for now is to play and to practice those scales. Get the physical side of it right. Get the fingerings right and bear in mind the associated key signatures that go with them. Or I set you a terrible example here because I've just been thumping through these things to make them clear. But always try to make them as smooth and as flowing as possible. Okay? And evenness is the key word. Right, enough of scales, let's move on and look at this new piece that I've got for you. This time I'm actually going to play it through so you can hear what the end result needs to sound like. And the reason I'm doing that is that we are in the key of F major. Okay, and that means we have a B flat in the key signature, yeah? Here's the piece and you should be able to see that B flat there in the key signature. That means every time you come across a B in the score, wherever it is on the stave, you need to play the B flat instead, so the black note immediately below the B natural. So here's the piece. As I say, let me play it through with this score up on screen, and then there are just a couple of things that I want to talk about and mention. So we're ending P, P and S are really, really, really quiet there. Okay, so there's some stuff in there that is still relatively new. We've got some more dots after notes and some ties, which we saw in the last tutorial. And I want you to kind of keep thinking about and keep remembering, because these things are really pretty common in written music. Okay, remember that a dot lengthens a note by half. So those dotted minims you can see there last for 3 beats rather than 2. And ties join notes together. So the tied G's we've got there in bars 12 and 13 sound as a single note lasting for 6 beats. Now you might also notice we've got some other kinds of dots. Yeah, it's dots everywhere this week. And these ones are over some of the notes in the left hand, right over the note heads. Now these are staccato marks, yeah? And here they're all over the notes, above the notes, because on each of those notes we've got stems going down. If any of the stems were going up, then the staccato marks would be under the note. Now, if a note is played staccato, it means it's played short and detached with a little bit of bounce. Okay? Like that. So you're hitting it and coming straight off. Now, if you look at bar 2, we've got the notes on the first 2 beats slurred together. You might remember slurs from tutorial 8. So we're coming off the second note, the second pair of notes, fairly briskly anyway. But then the notes on the third beat, yeah, the A and the C, we play staccato, okay, like this. So each of those left-hand bars with that little pattern are played like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can vary just exactly how much staccato you put on each note, and sometimes in some contexts you'll be really staccato, so, and sometimes you'll be a bit less so. And there are actually ways of marking that. We can be semi-staccato and more extreme staccatos and stuff. But there is kind of room for interpretation. You have a bit of latitude there. Yeah. Slightly tricky stuff tends to come if you look at bars 9 to 11, where you have a legato right hand against staccato notes in the left. So at the end of bar 9, we've got that legato F against the bouncy, the staccato C in the left hand, and then the same in bar 10, where we've got the legato G in the right hand against the staccato C in the left hand. That's just a little bit tricky. Just keep your eye on that. It takes a little bit of practice to master that. This is where practicing with your hands separate at first and then putting them together will come in handy. Okay, so remember that a dot after a note, in other words to the immediate right of the note head, lengthens it by half, but a dot over or under is completely different. Yeah, that is a staccato mark. So there we go, that's it for another tutorial. I want you to learn and practice all your scales that we've learned so far, left hand and right hand over 2 octaves, hands together if you can. So some of them you might manage hands together, some of them not a problem, but at least separate hands for now. Remember, they're all in the PDF and the download link is below. Also work on the new piece, keep practicing the piece from the last tutorial, especially if you found it hard going, because at least you've now got my example to follow. Okay, so that's it. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and if you can spare, just like $3 a month to support my Patreon crowdfunding campaign, well, that would be fantastic. If lots of people just chip in a little amount, it basically pays for my time to spend making these tutorials rather than doing sort of boring contract work. And these tutorials and all the other tutorials I make, do check out some of my other tutorials, because if you're interested in jazz and blues and improvisation and stuff, you can start that now, really. You know enough to start working on some of those, at least the more straightforward ones. So there you go, check out patreon.com or Patreon, however you pronounce it, I don't know, /Bill Hilton. You'll also find that link in the text beneath this video. I will see you in tutorial 11. Bye-bye.